everyone. It's another episode of the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me I have
Gary Bull. And I am a professor of forest economics and management at the University of British Columbia and the Faculty of Forestry. I've been working with the forest sector for the last 3 decades.
and today we're going to talk about bioenergy. And I know I, for one, have not a clue what bioenergy is. So if you could let me and the listeners know what it is and what biomass is and how these sort of tie into construction and building overall.
So bioenergy is simply the use of biomass from forest or agricultural residues, mostly to basically take what was traditionally waste product in the forest or in agriculture and turn it into a form of energy. And so the relationship to the construction industry is that it's a way when we're doing primary breakdown of logs to make products for construction, wood products. There's often a tremendous amount of classically called waste material, and sometimes that can be up to half the log, and we have to figure out what to do with it that's environmentally benign or environmentally friendly. And so making energy makes sense.
I've seen it referred to as the wood pellet industry. So maybe you could explain what pellets have to do with things and how that works towards creating energy.
Okay, so the form of taking that waste and it can be burned either as chips or some other lower grade material we call hog fuel, or it can be pelletized into wood pellets if we want to transport it to long distances. So we do that here in Canada and in the United States, where if we want to ship to Japan or the UK, for example, typically it would go in the form of pellets, and we call them white pellets, and mostly is the way that we ship them.
And how did that start in the first place, and then how did it evolve from there? How is this well, I guess I'm not sure if the technology is the right word, but how has the technology evolved, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, so I think it became recognized that there, by accident, really, it was, I think, some of the first projects around pellets started with, at least here in British Columbia, with farmers trying to find ways to augment the diets of cows. And so found a procedure, an engineering procedure to be able to make pellets for animals to digest the cellulose and as part of the diet. So then it became recognized, well, we could do other things with this material. So energy, because of its consistency, it became used in coal-fired plants, coal-fired power plants, particularly in Europe, to basically reduce emissions from coal burning by adding in some woody biomass, and then eventually, as you can see in Europe, completely replacing coal as a source of energy in very large-scale power plants.
And so is this more something for industrial use, or is it the sort of thing where at some point you're going to take a version of this and put it in your car, or like what's the scale of this, or does it go all over the place?
Yeah, it does. We do have a residential sector as well as and so if you go to countries like Austria or Italy, for example, you'll see many homes will have wood pellet stoves as their main source of heating, and it's in this part of the world that makes a lot of sense, either because of lack of alternatives or because they have a lot of waste woody biomass around, and so therefore it becomes the cheapest, most efficient source of heat. And so there's that part of it. And so there is both industrial and residential.
Arguably, forestry is the biggest industry in BC. If it's not the biggest, it's definitely top three. And so, did this start here, or have we adopted from other people, or have we contributed ourselves to sort of moving this field forward?
Yes, so we've been a fairly early participant in this area within Canada. and certainly we're adopting to the production of pellets almost as early as the Americans were in the U.S. South. Um, and it, as I say, it started with very modest farming operations,
Hmm.
trying to find solutions to their problems. And then we quickly realized, especially with things like the mountain pine beetle and forest fires, that we had all this very low grade material, and ecologically, we had to find something to do with it because otherwise it was going to create even more problems out on the forest landscape. So we now, I think, produce something like 2.5 million tons a year of pellets, if not more, in British Columbia. And so it's an important industry here.
And in terms of growth of the industry, will there be a point where you run out of the amount of waste that you have, then you can't supply, and then what do you do?
So yes, so of course we're driven by um, the forest itself and what it can supply, um, and then the waste streams of industry in terms of what industrial waste that comes out of making solid wood and paper products, and so yeah, so there is a capacity limit driven by basically how much nature is going to provide us. But
Hmm.
we're not there yet. There's an awful lot of opportunities for us to basically use this as a vehicle to manage our forest in a better way.
And speaking of that, I'd be remiss if I didn't address the controversy around old growth forestry and how
Yeah.
that recently has been sort of ceased for a while. Does that affect this industry in any way, or are there already guidelines in place to keep that from being something that gets affected by pellets and other such waste usage?
Yeah. So the intent of the use of wood for bioenergy is really to use low grade material. Now, there will be
Hmm.
some very low grade logs that might get used, or some might call them even low grade pulp logs, and that could find its way into the supply chain. But you'll see from the Wood Products Association of Canada, the intent is not to be using any high grade material, for
Hmm.
construction, for example, into making a low value product like energy. So
Hmm.
there's no, the economic logic will always prevail. And so therefore, it's certainly not a threat to, the solid wood industry and construction
Hmm.
industry uses that solid wood. What it is really a partner that is complementary to the growth and sustaining sustainable development of the wood industry.
And just in terms of economic opportunities, what are the opportunities for this that haven't been fulfilled yet? And also, what are the export possibilities? Is this the sort of thing where you have to keep it local, or can you just send this off to, let's say, China wants to use this as a fuel? How do you get it from here to there?
So we already have transportation networks set up to
Hmm.
ship to Asia and to UK, for example. Pinnacle, one of the biggest pellet producers, and the biggest pellet producer in British Columbia, already has a dedicated ship running from Vancouver to Japan with long-term supply agreements attached. And these agreements can be 10 to 15 years in duration. So there is a long-term supply there, and so that's not a problem. But we're hoping, and frankly, what we're hoping is to see a lot more use of wood pellets within Canada, especially in areas where they're trying to shut down diesel power plants in the north and put them on a renewable fuel like pellets. And so we're going to see this emerging in a number of indigenous communities as well as non-indigenous communities where we're going to see an uptake in pellets as their major heating source.
And speaking of sustainable fuels and sustainable methods, where do pellets rank as opposed to, say, solar or wind or natural gas, which is not really all that renewable, but it's touted sometimes as semi-renewable. But anyway, where in sort of the list of
Where does it
those is it
rank?
in terms of efficiency?
Right.
Yeah.
And so it can be, I went through a power plant, for example, in Copenhagen, which was both a heat and power plant, right on
Hmm.
the edge of the city, and it was operating at a 93% efficiency. So that means the big smokestacks burning this biomass, there wasn't even steam coming out because it was going into the district energy heating system, which is something that's a tremendous potential here in Canada. We've barely scratched the surface yet of district energy heating systems, and that I think should be of a lot of interest to the construction industry in terms of how we design uh, infrastructure going into the future. And this is
Hmm.
something very underdeveloped in Canada. But we do have examples here in Vancouver, North Vancouver, out at UBC where I work. We do have smaller scale district energy heating systems, and they use biomass. And so, and they can use other types of fuels as well. That's the nice thing about district energy heating systems. You can switch if you have to, the energy source.
And this kind of goes into my next question, which is, and bear in mind I'm no physicist, but I would assume trees are well known to capture carbon. So when you're burning these off, you said they're sort of redirecting it. So maybe that addresses the question in the first place. But how do you address the fact that carbon's going to escape out of these pellets?
So yeah, so there can be emissions associated with the one point in time burning of them. So
Hmm.
that's well documented and it's reported, and any power plant has to report that as part of their, requirements to report to governments, both in
Hmm.
Canada and certainly in Europe. And but the difference with pellets and wood in general is we are growing. So as opposed to fossil fuel based material, we're living and working in a biological system where, as we
Hmm.
do emit, we're also sequestering back in the forest every year as the trees grow back.
Right.
So it's a you've got to take a life cycle analysis approach to analyzing the contribution of wood energy or bioenergy, um, in terms of the emissions and the sequestration balances that are happening every year. And in general, I would say the industry is carbon positive. Back to your earlier question around the relative importance of woody biomass to solar and wind.
Hmm.
Now, I don't have all the data compiled in front of me for Canada, but I do know that in Europe, for example, if you look at renewable energy as a block of energy, basically almost 60% of it comes from biomass. Solar and
Hmm.
wind is a much smaller proportion. Now it's growing, but you still see in Scandinavian countries and so on that woody biomass as a source of energy, and basically a source of both power and heat, is incredibly important for how they have decarbonized their economies.
And just talking of that, it sounds like Europe is, I don't know if they're way ahead of us, but they seem to be in the lead. So maybe you could address what they're doing.
So yeah, I would invite any listener to go take a tour in Scandinavia, in Sweden or Finland, or particularly Denmark, and just see the role of renewable and UK too, by the way, has with a large company called Drax, which has just invested heavily in British Columbia. And the decarbonization that's happening within their power plants is truly impressive. And then, of course, for colder climates like Sweden and Finland, you will find that the heat is also an incredibly important part of the story. It's not just producing electricity. And so I think for folks in the construction trades, The looking at how you build buildings to use biomass or bioenergy could be probably the most environmentally friendly thing that you can do, as opposed to, using natural gas.
And is this the sort of thing where maybe it's both? You build new buildings with this in mind, or can you retrofit older buildings? Because a lot of energy efficiency involves retrofitting, but can you do that with this, or do you have to sort of build it with the biomass in mind when you're creating a structure?
So if you, yeah, I guess it all depends on the kind of buildings we're talking about, right? But
Hmm.
the heating plant, for example, can be converted without having to convert pipes, right? Within the building and so on. You
Hmm.
could just switch. But again, some buildings, and if they're smart, are probably like district energy heating systems I spoke about earlier. You have the ability to switch from natural gas to wood to other forms of energy if required, um, because of supply constraints or whatever. So, um, yeah, so I don't think you would have to do, I'm not an engineer, but
Hmm.
the retrofitting issue I don't see as the single biggest issue facing the construction industry, and more adoption of bioenergy in heat and power.
Okay, and finally, what do you think is the future for pellets? I mean, that's kind of a wide-ranging question, but any future trends you see that we might see in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, I think we will see an increase in uptake of bioenergy in Asia in particular. I think the Europeans are already far along down that path. I hope we will see an acceleration of its use particularly in remote communities in northern Canada, but also in urban areas like Vancouver. There's pilot projects being thought of for Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, and so on. So we might see a greater uptake here in urban areas as well. But I think Asia is going to be the big question mark. They have so many coal-fired power plants, and they are. We've been in discussions with energy producers in Japan and Korea, and in fact, we've been asked to make presentations to an Asian network. And let's say Taiwan, for example, if it decided to convert from coal to biomass, because you can burn biomass in a coal facility uh, with little difficulties, really, and the demand is almost limitless. If
Hmm.
two countries like Taiwan and Japan decided to seriously convert, and China and other parts of Southeast Asia, it just has a tremendous potential to grow.
Okay, on that optimistic note, thank you very much for your thoughts today.
Okay, you're welcome.